Good evening. If I could have everybody take their seats so we can get started. Not hold you here all night. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Hallie Bernstein-Saylor. I'm the editor of the Boulder City Review, and I want to thank you all for coming tonight. Our goal is just to get you to get to know the candidates who are running for mayor and give you a chance to compare apples to apples so everybody will answer the same question. I've got 8 questions that have been randomly drawn. Everybody will also get an opportunity to introduce themselves, and then there should be some time afterwards for some individual time for you to meet with each of the candidates. As a reminder, we'll be doing this again on the 13th of March for the City Council candidates. We hope you can come back and hear the City Council candidates. So, without further ado, we're going to go ahead and start. I want to thank the 3 candidates for mayor coming. Mayor Woodbury, Councilman Kieran McManus, and Councilman Warren Harvey. Without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get started and start with you, Mr. Mayor, to give you time to introduce yourself.
Thank you. Everybody hear me okay? Good. We're going to play musical whatever with the microphone tonight to smooth around. So I appreciate the honor to be here tonight. Thank you very much for everybody for coming. And want to thank the Boulder City Review for sponsoring this event. It's always good to have time to listen to the candidates, hopefully address many of your concerns. And here's some questions that were input, I think, by various citizens. So I'm Mayor Woodbury. I've been on City Council for 8 years now. The first 4 as a City Council member, the last 4 years as your mayor. During that time, we've accomplished a lot. I've served on the Health District Board of Directors. I've also served on the Regional Transportation Commission Board. Currently, I'm doing that as well. I've served on the Civilian Military Council in the past. I'm currently serving on Las Vegas Global Economic Alliance Board, and in various other capacities over the years on committees and commissions. I have a family of 7. My extended family, my father, my sister, and my great uncle have been public servants for many years. I think I counted over 70 years. My great uncle was a school board member for 24 years. My dad was a county commissioner for 28 years. My sister was a state assemblywoman for 10 years, and now I've been doing this for a long time. We're committed to public service. Hopefully we're doing good things, and I'll go ahead and pass the mic.
My name's Kieran McManus. I also want to thank Ms. Bernstein-Saylor for setting this opportunity up. I've now been on City Council for nearly 2 years. I'm a native of Boulder City. I was born and raised here. Went through the Boulder City High School, attended UNLV for a couple of years, transferred to the University of New Hampshire, which is where my parents were from originally. Received a degree in political science. Returned here. This has always been my home. Went to work in Las Vegas, as so many of us do, and wound up with a transfer to the Phoenix area. I was down there for about 13 years. Through another corporate move, I was in Oklahoma for about 3 years and had an opportunity to move back to Boulder City in 2006. Always stayed in touch with Boulder City, even during the 20 years, almost 20 years that I was gone. My mother lived here, my brother lives here. So again, I find this to be my hometown. It's comfortable living here. I enjoy what we have here, and my intent is to continue to see that we have that small town atmosphere for all of us to enjoy.
serve as your councilman for the last 2 years. When I ran for council, I identified a problem that I saw for some people who had lost faith in their government, their local government. And so I made this as one of my objectives, to restore the faith of people in their local government. In order to do this, what I've done is, for the last 2 years, I've had open sessions on Saturday, coffee with the councilman. And I've enjoyed talking with folks that come up. I've learned a lot from those folks. And to hear, to listen. And I think perhaps one of the problems that we've had in the past is we don't listen enough. I'm the guy who also organized the utility town hall meeting. I'm the guy who, as a result of that, created an ad hoc utility commission, and actually now we're moving to a formal utility commission as part of the city government. I've been happy, I've been pleased to participate in all the events here in town. I've raised my family here, brought here 37 years ago. My kids went through the schools here, and Boulder City is unique. And if there's a tagline that I'd like to say is, let's keep Boulder City, Boulder City.
Thank you very much. Now let's go ahead and we'll start with our first question. All of these questions were submitted by people in the community. We solicited them both through the paper and on social media, so don't blame me. Okay, your first question is, what is your stance on limited growth within city limits? And we'll go ahead and start with Mayor Woodbury, since you have the microphone.
All right. Thank you. Well, first off, in Boulder City, obviously, we have the controlled growth ordinance. It's been in place ever since I moved here in 1970. Well, the year after I moved here, it was instituted in 1979, and it's been great for our community. I definitely support the controlled growth ordinance. It's evolved a little bit over the years, but it's pretty much stayed the same. And you know, one of the things I heard coming right out of the gate in this campaign was that I was the growth guy in Boulder City. I was in favor of massive growth. And Mr. McManus, in his initial political announcement, said that. And I kind of made a joke at the last forum we had that was sponsored by the Community Alliances. You know, what was he talking about? Was it my girth that he's talking about? Because I don't understand that in Boulder City. We've always operated within the controlled growth ordinance, and we always intend to operate within the controlled growth ordinance. It's good for our community. We focus on infill instead of leapfrog development. And, you know, we have had in the past certain times when the voters have told us and mandated to us that we should sell some land, either to pay for certain types of infrastructure or otherwise. And, you know, it's important that when the voters tell us that we follow through on that. But in terms of our 120 allotments a year, it's been something like 23 years since we've issued 120 allotments. And, in fact, in the last decade or so, it's been next to nothing. I think starting in 2008 construction year, we had like 4 consecutive years of 0 allotments that were issued. Over the next 4 years, we had 3 of those 4 years where only 3 allotments were issued. And then one of those years, there was something like 20-something. And so the only growth that we've seen is almost negative growth, if you look at it compared to the birth rate and things like that. But recently, we've had the cottages that has gone in to replace the mobile home park. Even that didn't fully replace the number of units that were there. There were like 65 units that are still in the process of being built to replace the 80 or 90 or so that were at the mobile home park. I think it's a great project. And also the Storybook Homes project, which is just getting started. 60 allotments have been issued to them. A couple of weeks ago, when we had our first forum, only 3 certificates of occupancy have been issued, with like 13 more on the horizon. And they're not going to finish their 60 allotments before those expire, so they're going to have to apply again. Controlled growth is what we do. It's why we moved here. why we live here, why we want to stay here. We love our small town charm, and I intend to keep it that way. Thank you.
Well, I do confess, I am the person who said that the current mayor was an advocate for growth. That was actually one of the motivations for me to run for city council. I had been regularly attending council meetings over the past several years, and what I saw were large tracts of land going on to our land management plan. 1,000-acre development south of the dump. 1,700 acres out at the proposed interchange for I-11. Those are not infill projects. Those are extending Boulder City far beyond what it is currently. When I see proposals like that and understand that there are a lot of costs involved in extending utilities out, drawing business away from our current commercial district, again, that was one of the major motivations for me to run for city council. At our last council meeting, we removed those tracts of land from our land management plan. That was my proposal. I don't see the need for us to have that type of development here in Boulder City. I also filed a motion against the cottages, an appeal against the variances that were granted for that development. Specifically because of the type of development that was being done. I certainly am not against all growth here in Boulder City, but I think we need quality growth here in Boulder City, and I'm afraid with that project that there's simply not enough room for people. So while we can certainly add some housing to Boulder City, we need to be very careful about how we do that. When we're talking about projects that use up hundreds of acres of land at a time, I don't believe that's appropriate. We have projects that we're working on, such as an expansion of the Southern Nevada Railroad Museum. I think that our old airport property is a possibility to develop a historic theme there, perhaps an RV park, perhaps a second grocery store that we all would like to see. Those are the types of things that are infill. They will draw tourists here. They will help our businesses that have lost a great deal of the traffic when the bypass opened. But I don't see a need for us to go far beyond what we already have. We have a very strong solar energy industry based here in Boulder City. It brings millions of dollars into our city every year, accounts for about 1/3 of our budget. There are additional projects that have already been approved and will be built soon. So when we talk about a need for growth, I think we have a lot of growth going on, and it's the type of growth that supports our city. Thank you.
2 years ago, when I ran for city council, one of the items that was on the ballot was a modification of the controlled growth ordinance to change it. The position was, oh, we're going to change it just a little bit. However, we go back to the history, 1979, Ralph Dent and the other concerned citizens were concerned about the fact that the city was growing much too rapidly, much too fast, and it was actually outgrowing the infrastructure to support it. And so the controlled growth ordinance was crafted. It has worked. Usually you don't fix things that are working. And so I'm against any change proposed in the future to change the controlled growth ordinance. It has kept Boulder City. It's kept it a small town with the charm and independence from the people across the hill, which we like to, of course, use the amenities over there, but we like the way we live here. The fact is that we've already eschewed having gaming. We don't particularly want gaming. We don't want the revenue from that. We don't want marijuana dispensaries. We're going to forego that revenue. And so we're unique in Nevada and unique in southern Nevada specifically. The controlled growth ordinance has been successful. Growth generally does not pay for itself. Our infrastructure, especially the electrical infrastructure, is already strained and aged. So to have additional housing of any great number causes additional costs, capital costs, that someone's going to have to pay for. So controlled growth has worked. My position is it works, don't change it. It's fine as it is. The whole idea of Boulder City is to be unique and independent in the state, and it is, and it will remain so.
Let's keep going with Warren, and we'll start the other way with the next question. Our next question is, what are your thoughts on historic preservation and repurposing city-owned buildings?
Again, one of the reasons we live here is the atmosphere of this town. This town is a historic town. Now, lately there's been some social media commentary of comparing Boulder City to Mesquite or other towns. Now, Boulder City is unique. It's a unique set of folks that live here, a unique outlook on life. We like it the way we have it right now. We don't really want to compare ourselves to other towns. We have assets here that I believe should be kept in the city, on the city rolls in perpetuity. We should not be considering selling city properties. And the example is just recently, to take a backward look at what happened with the hospital. The hospital was sold under the best of intentions, and then with a number of transfers, it came down to being sold to someone who wanted to develop it for another use, and it was demolished. We cannot afford to take a chance with city properties, historic properties. But likewise, we need to keep them up. And in historic preservation across the country, the things that seem to work the best to preserve historic properties is to repurpose them. For example, the post office in Las Vegas, I believe, was repurposed as the Mob Museum. Well, that's probably wonderful and appropriate for Las Vegas, but in Boulder City, I can see repurposing our buildings, but not in that particular format. I can see a boutique restaurant, for example, or in the case of the airport hangar, there's at least a half a dozen ideas that are floating out there. And I'd see those as possibilities where we lease to the independent developer, but we retain control of the use, and the lease is not a 99-year lease, it's a lease that allows the developer to regain his investment, but we still have the ability to pull it back if it goes off the rails. Historic preservation is absolutely a necessary thing to keep the Boulder City, which is a recurring theme. The fact is that we are unique. We want to remain unique. We don't want fast development. We do want to keep the charm and the character of our downtown business area, as well as our expanded historic area, as it is. And in that regard, I would oppose anything in the future that would dispose or demolish any of our historic properties.
When we talk about historic preservation, I think it's important that everyone understand it. I know when I ran for city council 2 years ago, there were statements made that my position was you wouldn't be allowed to change the knobs on your kitchen cabinets if I were elected. That's silly. That has nothing to do with what preservation is. Preservation is protecting and promoting the architecture that we currently have in our historic district. Our entire town is not historic, as much as we may like to believe that. We have an established historic district here in Boulder City. The issue with that is our codes that have been applied to that don't require anyone to adhere to anything. They can do whatever they want, which is how we lost the old hospital. I know people say, well, it's private property. You can't tell people what to do with their own property. Well, these codes are developed not to harm anyone. but to promote the value in their property. If you have a historic home and it is substantially the same as when it was built, and the person next to you decides, well, you know what, I'm just going to tear mine down and build an ultra-modern stainless and glass house right next to yours. You lose value for everyone in that neighborhood when something like that occurs. One of the things that I've tried to get across, and I think we're going to be able to do that, is to set aside a little bit of money for people as they start a project. If maintaining that architecture on the front of the home is going to be a little more expensive than other materials, there may be grants available for that type of thing. Not to pay for the whole project, but just to help with that difference. We certainly do that for our business community. We withhold over $500,000 for our redevelopment agency from our tax base to devote to those businesses. So it wouldn't be a large amount of money, but grants up to maybe $1,000 for a project might be sufficient for people to be able to get that done. But we need that code in place that would say, when you purchase in the historic district, the zoning laws are going to say that you will maintain that architecture on the front of the home. As far as repurposing buildings go, I too believe that we should only lease, and that was why I was the only vote against the sale of the airport property. Both of the other candidates voted to sell that property with no restrictions whatsoever on it. Anything could have happened to it. That vote was pulled back. Again, when we talk about repurposing, it also needs to be appropriate for the neighborhood. We can't put bars into residential neighborhoods and subject those folks to that. So we should do it what makes sense for Boulder City and what helps promote everyone's values in their homes. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me just start off by saying that that's absolutely not true, that nobody's ever voted to sell any of those properties, including the airport property with no restrictions on it. Historic preservation is one of our top 5 priorities in our recently adopted strategic plan. And that means we have broad-based consensus throughout a community. We went up to the community, and that's the input we got back, that that's one of our priorities that we need to have. Across the board, our council members feel that way as well. So we know historic preservation is important in Boulder City. It's always been an important part of Boulder City. We're the town that built Hoover Dam, and we're proceeding through that process. The next step in the process is to create a historic preservation and cultural division or arm of our community development department, and that's already in the works as well. I'm going to be asking my colleagues to join me as we go into this budget cycle and to specifically engage to hire a dedicated person on city staff that's solely for historic preservation and cultural art. That's important. We need to do that so that the focus remains on that. We can't just take our strategic plan and put it on the shelf. I've written articles in the past about the processes and the things we need involved in historic preservation. I've said that there's 5 P's involved. Those include priorities, procedures, plans, purpose, and private versus public. And all of those aspects are going to be folded into this plan. Moving forward, we need to keep in mind that one of my rules of thumb is you have to have incentives are always more effective than the hammer, the carrot more than the stick. If you can incentivize people to do good things with properties, then they're going to do it. If you try to force it or cram it down their throats, then you're going to get pushed back. And as a community, we've come together in certain properties, one of which is the Boulder Dam Hotel, and it took a community to preserve that building. That has been going on for decades, and multiple people, including those that have donated their time repeatedly, that have donated lots of money. There's also been public dollars put into that. It's a combination of everything. I served on the board of directors of that, the Boulder City Museum and Historical Association for 6 years. I drafted the documents that helped them to purchase that from the old Hotel Association. My wife has been involved in preserving that building by raising funds to the tune of $2 million to pay down the debt. We know how to preserve buildings. If we come together as a community, we can do that. And it's not just buildings, but it's the history that goes with those buildings. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next question, we'll start with Mr. McManus, Councilman McManus. What are your thoughts on preserving wildlife and open areas surrounding the county?
We have a conservation area here in Boulder City. It came about as an agreement among several different government agencies for the protection of the desert forests. I believe within that conservation area there's some 86,000 acres of land that have been set aside for that specific purpose. One of the first meetings I sought out after being elected to council was to meet with the Clark County manager who is over the Desert Conservation Program, because I wanted to understand what that program was all about. There are some very rigid rules in place about that. It's not up to Boulder City alone to make the decisions about what happens in that area, and I think that's to our benefit. There are multiple layers of permissions that would have to occur before any of that land can be developed or the purpose changed for it. Again, as I said, that's a good thing. We love our open space. It's one of the reasons we live here in Boulder City. It serves to protect the wildlife that's in that area. And when we look at our conservative growth, that's another protection that we have for that. Again, I grew up here in the desert. I've lived on the East Coast. I've lived in the Midwest. I love the desert. It has its own character, and I think it's very important for this community that we maintain those open spaces. If we don't do that, if we give in to these large projects that use up hundreds of acres of land, we will quickly move into that or close to that conservation area. And again, that has been set aside with very strong regulation. I support that. I think we're in good shape in that area. Thank you.
First, I'd like to correct a misstatement of fact by Mr. McManus. He indicated that he was the only one that voted against the sale of the airport hangar. That was not the issue. The issue was a ballot question asking the public's ideas or approval in the disposition of the airport hangar. There was no decision made or no vote on whether we're going to sell it. Regarding the environment, I was meeting with a number of folks regarding the Desert Tortoise Preserve, and it's interesting to determine, as Mr. McManus had mentioned, the layer of hierarchy of various agencies that are involved in that preservation area. When it comes right down to it, the top of the hierarchy is the Fish and Wildlife Service, and they are the controlling body in the local government. And I learned also something that was very disturbing to me, in that the county has a commission, a board, where they meet to discuss issues in the El Dorado Valley and in southern Nevada. And for some time, our representative has not been at that meeting. And we've essentially forfeited our place at the table for something that's very crucial to our future. Now, I brought that to the attention of the city manager, and he's going to correct that problem. My view regarding the desert, it's a natural resource that I'd like to preserve for future generations. Again, it's one of the elements of why people live here. They go out and look to see the raw desert, and again, we've got more of it in our city than any other city in the state. By landmass, we're the largest city. We've got tremendous asset in terms of the raw desert in the future, and I'd like to keep it that way. It essentially is money in the bank for us. As that land remains undeveloped, it actually becomes more worthwhile to us all. It also preserves the desert wildlife, which is the habitat for that area. The issue again regarding preservation of that, I think is sometimes in jeopardy, and we need to take a closer look. Recently, the folks who wanted to lease the part of the dry lake bed, I very strongly opposed that. And as a result of the negative input to the developer down there, they withdrew that their request to use part of the desert, the dry lake bed. And I'm kind of proud of that effort. I put a lot of time in that.
Thanks. It's easy to get tongue-tied up here. I'm sure that was a Freudian slip when he said he wants to pervert the desert. You know, when I first read this question, it's kind of comical actually. I read, you know, what are your thoughts on preserving wildlife in open areas? And I saw the little word, wildlife, and I thought, hey now, come on, how come you're picking on my kids? They are kind of wild sometimes, but they're good upstanding citizens and they excel in a lot of things. But then I realized, okay, we're talking about a different type of wildlife here. So, of course, it's important that we preserve our wildlife. It's important that we preserve our open areas. And let me just give you some examples of some of the things that we've done over the past. The dry lake bed obviously is an important area that we need to preserve. You know, we have rocket launchers down there. We have our drone users. We have the off-road vehicles down there. People just gather there to enjoy the great outdoors. Boulder Canyon is another area that we need to preserve. We have the mountain biking there, all the hiking trails that go on, and the zip lining. Hemingway Park, where our bighorn sheep come down off the mountain. Great place to be and for visitors to come and see that majestic spectacle. Our desert areas, we have lots of trails and camping areas. All that's really important. The biggest asset that Boulder City has, besides our residents, is our land. You know, we have over 200 square miles of land, the biggest geographic city in all of Nevada. And so we need to keep preserving that. As far as what we've done, we do have the environmentally restricted areas for the desert tortoises. We give Vegas a lot of credits because we have such a big area that we've dedicated to that. It's completely preserved for wildlife and endangered species. We recently had a proposal by one of our solar developers to put extra solar facilities on the main area of the dry lake bed. And that went out to the Planning Commission, to the public, and came back to council, and we rejected that idea. It shows that our land management process, where we get public input, is working. That's important that we protect those areas. After the zip lines went in 10 years ago in Boot Lake Canyon, we did a lot of things to reconfigure that. We reconfigured the access. We put in new restrooms, and we have a preservation area around the roundabout there, where we have an interpretive center and a hike area there. That helps to protect the area and keep interest in there, prevents people from running wild and abusing the road going up to Radar Mountain and things like that. So yes, it's important that we continue on that track. There's lots of other areas that we've done well. We can always do better. It always needs to be at the forefront of preserving the great outdoors in Boulder City.
Thank you. We'll go ahead and start this next question with you, Mayor Woodbury, and then we'll just work down the line. This question is, would you advocate for flexible scheduling to ensure city employee coverage on all business days at each and every city department, such as Monday through Friday and not just Monday through Thursday?
Yeah, that was an interesting question, too. So, it's a double-edged sword somewhat. I mean, obviously, some of our city services are open 24/7. Our emergency response services, our police and our fire are always open and always accessible, and that's important that we always keep them that way. Some of our departments, go overtime too on certain days or certain times, and it's important that we do that. The way we have it now is Monday through Thursday, but we're early morning, like 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. instead of, your regular 9 to 5 or whatever. And those early morning hours are important. Those late evening hours are important to many people, including our citizens who need to access those services because of family circumstances or because of jobs at those particular hours. So it's good that we have it that way. Should we add a Friday in addition? Well, we could. I haven't really heard that being a critical push in Boulder City. If we did, we definitely have to not only survey the citizens to make sure it made economic sense. It'd be a cost-benefit analysis because you might have to add extra hours, extra personnel, which would mean extra dollars that we would have to spend on that. And anytime dollars and cents are involved, you got to be careful what you do. And so, we would certainly also need to take into account our existing employees and make sure that their needs and desires are taken into consideration if that were ever a push that needed to be made. But so there's lots of considerations that would have to go into this before we could ever make that decision. And of course, we want to hear from you as the citizens at large. And we'd probably do some surveys and some town hall meetings and things like that to get your input.
Are you trying to make all our employees mad at us? I've worked flex schedules before. There's good and bad to it. You work very long days, but you get that extra day off. I realize that there is inconvenience when a business is completely closed, as our city hall is on Fridays. I think we can put that to the employees and ask. There may be employees that would prefer having a 5-day week. Personally, as I said, I've worked flex schedules. I prefer the 5-day week. The long days leave very little time to do anything else. You wind up just spending that extra day off trying to catch up on other things. Another possibility, and again I've seen it work very well, is not everyone has Friday off. Some people have Monday off, some people have Friday off. You're still in operation at whatever business you're conducting. We may look at, is it specific departments that people are having a problem with, where they need that extra day of access. The utility department, perhaps, is one example. Building permits might be another example. We do have, obviously, 24-hour police and fire. There is someone who's reachable at the city, but maybe we need to designate a couple of department heads to always make sure we have coverage at City Hall. If someone has an issue, there will be someone available they can speak with and get a solution for them started. But I do think that if we do something like that, we do need to take into consideration these employees have been working this type of schedule for years and years now. We need to be sensitive to what their schedule is at without forcing a change on them. But I really do believe if we polled polled the employees, we may find that the survey would come back and say we would have enough personnel to do that. And just to conclude, both of the other candidates have apparently contradicted things I've said tonight. I stand by my answers, and I'll be happy to speak with anyone after the forum tonight and let you know why I believe that's the case. Thank you.
I find it interesting that in southern Nevada, almost all the local governments are only open 4 days a week. I found that interesting when I moved here because that certainly isn't the way it's done back east. But again, we're unique. We do things differently. And in fact, I had a discussion with my wife regarding what do you think about doing flex schedules or proposing having a 5-day week? And she said, well, that's great if you don't want to get elected. And the point is that I took it a step further and I had a conversation with our city manager. And I said, the thing that's going to happen is our city hall is going to be redesigned in the future. There's money in the budget to do that. And it would seem to me that when that redesign takes place, we incorporate a service kiosk that is available on Fridays. I know myself, I've had issues where something happened, a broken water line at our other house, and tried to call, and it's unfair to be able to talk to a police dispatcher. It's unfair to the police dispatcher, it's unfair to the caller, because he really doesn't get a resolution. Now, if he had talked to a dedicated person who would listen to him, get the information, and if it's an emergency, route it to the appropriate folks that are on 24/7 or 5-day-a-week service, or hold it for the appropriate person on the following week. So the kiosk is an idea that I think can be incorporated almost immediately. Again, I've raised it with the city manager. He's got it under consideration. And I would hope that along with that we'd have a reconsideration of City Hall having all those locked doors. To be buzzed into somebody's office, I understand that we live in a tense time, but isn't this the safest city in the state of Nevada? And I just think it transmits the wrong impression to people coming up to do business in City Hall. They got to stand there and knock on the door to get access to either the city manager or HR people or whatever. To her credit, the city clerk's door is always open, so I commend her on her openness and willingness to have anybody come in and ask a question or get information there. I think they all should follow her lead in that regard.
Okay, we'll go ahead and continue with you, Councilman Marhay. This next question, which political figure in the United States do you most consistently align yourself with philosophically? Which political figure in the United States do you most consistently align yourself with philosophically?
All right, well, that's an interesting one because first off, you got to pick somebody that's dead. Because it's too controversial to do anything otherwise. Now, I gave this some thought, and although I considered Millard Fillmore, I decided that the person that I admire the most of the presidents of our country, besides George Washington and Abraham Lincoln, which would be a tremendous amount of hubris to associate yourself with those past presidents, and even the one I picked, and that was Theodore Roosevelt. In reading about Theodore Roosevelt, he was a man that was afflicted with health issues, and by perseverance, he overcame those health issues. He was a strong-willed man. He was independent. When the Republican Party left him, he left the Republican Party and formed the Bull Moose Party. So there's that idea of he was his own man, he marched to his own drumbeat, and he was a tough guy. The interesting thing about it, I read about he was actually giving a speech, and there was an assassination attempt. And the bullet actually pierced an eyeglass case that he had in his pocket and actually pierced his skin. It didn't go to the lung. He completed the speech before he sought medical attention. He's a tough guy, and I don't know if I'm that level of toughness, but I got to admire somebody that is that tough. And I guess there's a reason why he's on Mount Rushmore. I'm not going to be on Mount Rushmore. I know that, but he's my guy, and that's who I pick.
Well, my favorite has always been Harry Truman. Most of you are probably familiar with his phrase, "the buck stops here." I think that Mr. Truman came into office at a very difficult time. The end of World War II was nearing, although they couldn't tell that at that point. He had a very difficult decision to make to use nuclear weapons in wartime. That was a lot of civilians who lost their lives as a result of that decision. But when you read more about his history, he was certainly a compassionate person. And when he made decisions, he took his time to get there. He talked to a lot of folks. He got the input from them. He understood what the pros and cons were. And he was able to make those tough decisions. Again, his slogan being, "The buck stops here." I believe when you are mayor, you have to take that stance. You know, we had a horrible situation here in Boulder City with our animal control shelters. The response to that was to hire a public relations firm. I don't know that that's an appropriate response, and I certainly wouldn't categorize that or characterize it as the buck having stopped there. When we look at an individual like Harry Truman, you know, he was chosen as vice president for Franklin Roosevelt in Roosevelt's 4th term as president. My understanding is Roosevelt didn't involve him in very many things. So when he took over, he really had to catch up on things. I think he did that very well. When he ran on his own, some of you may remember him holding up the newspaper that had the blaring headline of his opponent having won, Dewey wins. He did win that race, and he won that race while he was making all those decisions on how to rebuild Europe. So when I look at an individual and see the skill set that they brought forth, again, I may not have all of those skills, but that's the type of thing that I try and strive for, is to understand all of the issues, talk to people, and try and make that best decision, knowing that it's your decision to make. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to exercise a little bit of hubris here, and we'll talk a little bit about George Washington, and then I will actually segue into somebody that's currently living as well. So George Washington, and I could have picked lots of people, obviously, but George Washington, I'm listening to the book on tape, 1776. And one of the things that I extremely admire about George Washington, in addition to the fact that he did great things as president, but when he was General George Washington, he went through a lot of hard times for years and years and years during the Revolutionary War. He made many blunders, actually, while he was going through that, strategic blunders. But one of the things that he was good at was listening to people. And he wasn't afraid to admit he was wrong or to change course. He had a military council that contradicted him all the time. And he thought certain things would work better, but he listened. And he took ideas from lots of different people. And he was able to pull out of those the right way to do things. And because he had that humility, and because he had the willingness to listen, and because nobody was too unimportant for him to listen to, he obviously got us through, or one of the major reasons to get us through the Revolutionary War and to establish our country as it is. So the political figure that I've chosen to say that I'm not necessarily philosophically as much as one that I admire as well, but also somewhat philosophically is my father, Bruce Woodbury. And because he's a similar type of person to George Washington, he, over the years, listened to thousands and thousands of people, and there's not a place that I don't go in the United States, out of the United States, where somebody doesn't walk up to me and say, you look like Rose Woodbury, that's my mom, or, you know, if I'm wearing something that suggests I'm from Boulder City or from Las Vegas, do you know Bruce Woodbury? And I have, by the way, I have one of his t-shirts and things like that, because he was a bridge builder. He wasn't a bridge burner. He knew how to build consensus among people. He knew how to listen to people and bring people together. And he was a doer. He got things done. He wasn't a punter. Wasn't a wait-and-see type person. He was able to synthesize lots of information, because we have lots of information that comes our way, and find the right answers and then move on it. And I feel like I do that to a degree, to a large degree, in my mayorship, and that's what I aspire to be.
Thank you. Let's go ahead and we'll start with Kieran McManus this time. Where do you stand on the off-highway vehicle issue? Do you believe it would be good or bad for Boulder City?
Well, I think they're a lot of fun, myself. I think they're also a misunderstanding when we talk about off-road vehicles. People have different ideas of what they are. They may think they're motorcycles, they may think they're the three-wheelers. What's being talked about with an off-highway vehicle is a specific class of vehicle. It's been defined by the state of Nevada in state statute. There are already a couple of communities around the state that allow the use of the vehicles, some in restricted areas, some for excluded areas, or they've set aside Mesquite's, the town I'm thinking of. They don't allow them in their commercial area, but they're allowed in other areas. These are vehicles, they're four wheels, they have a roof on them in most cases, they have headlights, taillights, horns, that type of thing. I recall when I grew up here, we had dune buggies, Baja bugs, sand rails, all those types of things running around town. Again, they're a lot of fun. Then people have to modify the exhaust system, and so they're really loud and they bother the neighbors. They don't go far enough out in the desert, so they stir up the dust around people's homes and make a lot of noise. That's the downside to any of these vehicles. The state program, or the state definition of the vehicles, if the vehicle qualifies, it gets a sticker. So it's been, determined to meet the requirements of the state. Certainly somebody can modify the vehicle after that, but that's against the law. And if it's against the law, that means that they're not able to be used. In this particular case, this is going to be an advisory question. So we're looking to the residents of Boulder City to make a determination. Do you want these vehicles on our streets or not? There had been discussion about this before, and the idea was that we would put a sunset on it. So maybe the measure would be in effect for a year, and then if it worked out, it would stay in effect. If it didn't work out, it would not be renewed. The idea was that, no, we don't want to wait, we want to hear from the citizens. And we should. On an issue like this, we definitely should. I've foregone my motorcycle riding out in the desert for about 20 years now, probably because I'm getting a little too old for it. So again, I understand why a lot of people don't like these things. There's another factor that we never knew about, and that's the presence of asbestos out in the desert. That's a concern for people, especially those who live on the edge of town. We know it's out there now. We don't know the extent of it. We don't know the effects of it yet. But that's certainly something that should be taken into consideration for this decision. Thank you.
All right, so this is an advisory ballot question, and being such, we're asking the citizens to tell us, not the other way around. So I shouldn't be sitting here telling you how to vote on this. However, if it passes, we're going to be tasked as a city council. It's not binding on us, but if we proceed, then we would have to craft an ordinance. These are vehicles that are not street legal vehicles. And if they were, we wouldn't be going through this ballot question process at all. You could just go down to DMV, get them licensed and registered, and we would have nothing to say about it. But they're not street legal per se. And so if it does pass, we would have to address numerous types of issues. Those would include insurance, safety equipment type issues such as seatbelts and helmets and turn lights and headlights and tail lights and things like that. Possibly noise, if that were a big issue, whether they would be restricted to certain areas only, certain streets only in the city, and other liability type issues. One separate issue that's really big for the city, and before we could ever do this, would be the city's own insurance rates. We currently have Pool Pact as our insurer, and we've gone out to them to ask them, how would this affect the city's insurance rates? And they have been very evasive and not told us because they don't want to tell us until they actually see the ordinance and what it would mean. And so that would be a big issue we would have to make a determination on and get input from our insurer on before we could ever do something like this. Because if it drastically changed our insurance rates, then that would be another factor that we would need input on from the citizens. Not all off-road enthusiasts are bad. In fact, most of them are responsible, good people. But unfortunately, we have always a few abusers that give the off-road enthusiasts a bad rap. I too have off-road vehicles, and I think we even have one at OHB in my extended family that we have up in Utah. I like the desert. I like being out in it. I like people that don't abuse it, though, and that treat it nicely for walkers, hikers, bikers, and things like that. This is a really polarizing issue. Quite honestly, a lot of the complaints that we've gotten over the years until this proposal came forward were complaints about abusers and close to town, going out to the desert, and that's unfortunate. So we're not here to tell you. We want you to tell us, and when you make that decision, then obviously as your public servants, we're going to make sure that if the answer is yes, we're going to do it the right way.
Well, I've got some first-hand experience with these OHVs. My son is an enthusiast, one of my sons, my middle son, Marshall. And he has one of these razors, and it's an OHV, and he belongs to a group that goes out. One of their venues that they go to is Dumont Dunes. They have motorhomes, they circle these things, they have a campfire in the center, and they go off into the dunes to run these machines with my two grandsons. They've got their helmets on and goggles, and they kind of look like mini astronauts. But I could see it as a fun family event. Now the problem is, not all of these folks go into these organized things. We have a problem here in Boulder City. Repeatedly, I've gotten complaints from folks where motorcyclists have gone and off-road folks have gone right up to the property line. And when they're approached, they indicated they're going to do it no matter what. So I think one of the problems that we have is we have some lax enforcement, and we have some education to do with the existing off-road vehicles in Boulder City, that they're scufflaws. They don't obey the 1,000-foot exclusion zone from the residents. That's number one. Somehow that's got to be fixed. The issue of health concerns also is bothersome. In fact, that there's been plus and minus, yes and no. I'd actually like to hear an authoritative source from the health community or a health organization to give their opinion. I don't think anyone has given an opinion in terms of the asbestos. I've heard lots of back and forth on it, but there's no definitive answer. Another issue that would concern me is what would our standing be with our insurer, Pool Pact? What would these vehicles on our city streets do in terms of our insurance? Would it increase the premiums? The other issue is the fact that it could also cause tremendous additional congestion in the downtown area. I would be against anything that changes the character of Boulder City. These vehicles have the propensity to do that if it's not closely monitored and closely controlled. It'll be interesting to see what the results of the ballot question will be It'll be a hard job for us to balance the needs of the many for the wants for the few.
Thank you. We'll go ahead and we'll work down this way.
Okay.
The next question is, do you have any concerns about the present levels of the city's indebtedness? And what are your thoughts about incurring future debt?
I still couldn't hear.
The debt question.
Oh, the debt issue. Well, one of the thorns in my side has been in seeing our budget of $2.2 million a year, paying down a $35 million bond for a raw water line, which the enthusiasm of the past was needed to supply raw water to the 6 golf courses for Boulder City, because we were going to become the golf course nirvana of southern Nevada. As it turned out, 2 golf courses were built, Boulder Creek and Cascada, the private one, and we're not using all that water. In fact, it's kind of shocking to me that that underutilized water line is not providing raw water for irrigation. In fact, I think one of the golf courses is irrigated with drinking water, which is really unsustainable in my mind. The fact is, in terms of city debt, we're going to undergo a project, and the most recent project is the, that's before the voters, is the pool. If we're going to go before the voters and ask them for money, I believe that we first must exhaust every other possibility for funding. Grants, philanthropic, corporate, whatever. And the last resort is asking the citizens to pay for additional debt. If I could just wonder what we could do with that $2.2 million for the raw water line that's being underutilized. It just, it irks me from the day one, and it really bothers me that we're not using it completely as what the intention was for irrigation.
Anybody have their utilities bill go up lately?
Yeah.
Okay. When the statements are made about, well, growth pays for growth, and then you look at the studies and you see the actual impacts, growth does not pay for growth. The people who pay for growth are the people who already live there. They pay for extending utilities, increasing capacities, doing that type of thing. Many of you may be aware that here in Boulder City, we get about half of our electricity from Hoover Dam. When that proportion changes, you're going to pay more because we can't find power cheaper anywhere else. When I hear statements like, well, you know, all that money that was taken out of the utility fund to build Boulder Creek Golf Course was paid back. Well, governments don't pay money back. They just go get more tax money, or they shift away from projects that are necessary to pay that debt down. That's the situation we're in now. The only way that government pays off debt is by getting taxes or fees or services from its residents. There is no magic government money that comes around to pay that off. As Mr. Hardy mentioned, what the debt is of Boulder City right now is a project that was geared towards growth. We're paying that cost now. We had a $4 million debt incurred as a result of the third straw at Lake Mead. Again, how much has Boulder City contributed to the decline of Lake Mead? Because we haven't grown for 10 years or 20 years. So we're paying for growth that's regional in that case. That was debt that we were assigned and had to pay off. We need to be very careful when we look at these large projects. I suspect we'll be getting to the question on the pool, where we'll talk more about what that debt means. My belief is we should always avoid debt whenever possible. We should also make sure that the services we charge for are not geared to put money into reserve funds in the anticipation that we're going to grow. Again, our city has a large amount of revenue that comes in from these solar fields, but much of that money has had to go and pay for these different debts that have been incurred trying to chase growth in the past. If we would have used that money more intelligently for the betterment of the residents, I'm sure we would not be seeing these rate increases occur. We would not see a debt that's always having to be paid off because some project was getting done in pursuit of growth. So again, my stance on any type of indebtedness is you better make sure that it's benefiting the people who actually live here rather than anticipated people moving in. Thank you.
Thank you. So currently Boulder City's finances they've never been better. And during the last 8 years, as I've been on city council since I've been elected, that's been my mission, to make sure that our finances are in good solid shape, keeping our financial house in order and doing it even better and better. It's true that when I came on council in 2011, we inherited lots of debt. In fact, there were 5 debts in 2011 when I came on, totaling over $96 million in principal and interest. Since that time, every financial plan that we've passed and adopted on the city council, our mission in there has been to aggressively pay down our debt, and we've done just that. So today, we have only one remaining debt, and we've reduced our debt service by over $60 million. So the only remaining debt is